Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with what has now become a yearly tradition for the channel, and that one of the first videos I do for every year is now a bigger Survivor US ranking, to where I have now already done a winner ranking, season ranking, runner-up ranking, final juror ranking, merge boot ranking, and really I feel like the last really obvious big ranking to do here is to do my ranking of every first boot in the history of Survivor. So here we'll obviously be ranking every player that was the first voted out of their seasons, and like my other rankings, this is not an assessment of them as players. I do feel like that is a radically different list. This is mostly talking about the rights and wrongs that they did in the season that they were to first vote out, more so than how I feel like they would do on multiple appearances. Now, obviously in most seasons, the person who is the first boot is something that is pretty obvious. And however, there are some very strange situations. Now, for all of these seasons, I will be ranking the person who is the first voted out at Tribal Council on their seasons. I will not be including quits or medevacs into this list. So there are situations like the Courtney Moon medevac or the Pat Cusick medevac where they will not be included on the list, but instead the likes of like a Nina Acosta and a Jessica Pete will be included instead. Also, I will not be including any early game twists that led to eliminations that were not at tribal, so situations like Survivor Palau where Jonathan and Wanda went home, they will not be included, instead it will be Jolanda. Also Rupert and Candace's vote outs in Blood vs. Water, it will not be them, instead it will be Marissa Peterson. Also, obviously we have a weird case with Winners at War where the first boot of the season ends up being a finalist. However, I will be including Natalie Anderson on this list. However, I will only be talking about her game up until that first Tribal Council. Also, the final disclaimer here is the fact that I will be including both first boots from Survivor 41. Survivor 41 obviously had a twist in the first episode where two tribes went to tribal and both voted someone out. And while Abraham is technically the first boot and Sarah is technically the second boot, they were both booted under the same circumstances in that first round, so I will be including both of them here in this list. So those are all the disclaimers here, and through that we do have 44 players to be ranking here, and we'll be starting off at number 44, the worst first boot in the history of Survivor for me, and essentially the person that I feel like did the most wrong to cause their first boot is Michelle Chase from Survivor Gabon. Now, again, Michelle is a person that is on my top 10 worst players of all time list. They are pretty high, but they're not number one. However, I do think there's a serious argument for it. And again, as a first boot here, ranking the game they play in their first round, it is actually pretty astronomically bad how bad Michelle Chase played. I mean, she is a player that had no reason to be the first boot. She is a player that was one of the strongest of the entire season. I mean, she was the strongest woman in the first female immunity challenge that happened day one. She was the person on Fong who finished the immunity challenge first. Yet despite that, she was still a unanimous boot in the first tribal, to where the only person she even bothered to talk to across the entire Fong tribe was Kenny, and everyone else hated her. I mean, she was voted out because she was such a negative presence around camp. And for that to be a person who is your strongest competitor on your tribe is such an indictment on Michelle Chase. And through that, for me, I had to have Michelle Chase as the worst first boot here. Now at 43, we're actually only moving a season forward, and here we do have Carolina Eastwood from Survivor Tocantins. And Carolina is in a similar mold to Michelle Chase, someone that shouldn't have been the first boot on their season, especially over a Sandy, who should have been a very clear first boot, but instead they vote out Carolina. And again, a lot of it was supposedly because of similar reasons to Michelle Chase, to where Carolina was a very negative presence around camp, was a very bossy person, and through that really annoyed a lot of her tribe members. Stephen Fishback has gone on record in saying that he thinks that Carolina Eastwood is the worst player of Survivor of all time. And again, I do think there's a similar argument. Again, for me, Carolina and Michelle Chase are very similar in terms of the games that they played. I feel like for me, the thing that has her above Michelle is the fact that at least she wasn't like the physically strongest person on the tribe. For me, Michelle Chase was like just such a clear person that this should not have been the first boot, to where I feel like Carolina, you can kind of see it, even though still, I do think it is pretty bad that she was the first boot over a Sandy. But again, for me, that slight difference there boosts her up to number 43 here. Now, number 42 is another player I've gone on record. I think this person played terribly on his season, and that person is John Raymond from Survivor Thailand, who for me is the pretty typical too domineering figure of Survivor for me. I think this is the first person I think of when this person was just so overbearing to where he ends up being the first boot. But also mixing that with the fact that he just simply didn't gel with his tribe. I mean, he is a prankster and tried to prank the tribe into thinking that this shallow pit of water was their water well, and that ended up annoying certain members of his tribe. And for me, it is really humorous that John Raymond is looked at as this guy that was too domineering and through that had to be voted out when he was on Chuigon, which ends up being a pretty serious tribe through and through. And the fact that John Raymond didn't click with that tribe, I think is a pretty big indictment on him as well. John Raymond, again, came off as too much of the leader type to where they voted him out, despite, again, him being one of the most physical people on the tribe, had no reason to be voted out. However, again, the slight difference between Michelle Chase and Carolina for me is the fact that John Raymond at least had Helen on his side, kind of, even though they don't vote together, but there's at least someone on the tribe that didn't vote against him. Though, again, also really bad that John Raymond was voted out over Tanya, who was sick. So, again, really bad game, but again, minor changes that put him up here at 42. Now, number 41, we have a player that I actually feel bad for putting this person this low because I don't actually think they're that bad of a player. However, again, when I'm assessing this on the game they played on this season, their game is not that dissimilar from John Raymond. And here at 41, we do have Jolanda Jones from Survivor Palau. And again, this is another situation where there was no reason that Jolanda should have been the first boot, considering the fact that she was very clearly the strongest member of their tribe. I mean, she is the person that won the immunity challenge to become the captain of their tribe and led the schoolyard pick to decide the Oolong tribe. And the fact that Oolong still votes her out at the first tribal for being this too domineering of a personality is, again, a pretty bad indictment there. One not that dissimilar from John Raymond. Now, in a way, you could say that the vote out of Jolanda here is actually what caused the downfall of Oolong, as obviously Oolong ends up being a notoriously bad tribe, losing every immunity challenge from that point forward, and voting out Jolanda, their strongest woman, was clearly a reason for that. But that doesn't change the fact that, again, Jolanda couldn't even get these people to do something that was in their best interests. Now, again, I don't necessarily think Jolanda is the worst player in the world. If she were to play again, I wouldn't expect her to be an early boot. I do think that was a bit of a fluky situation, but again, based on the game they played their first time around, I do have to put her this low just due to the fact that, again, she had no reason to be the first boot and still was, with that being cited towards her domineering personality, and because that, she has to land here at number 41. Now, number 40, moving on to a player that I've always said is one of the worst first boots, where again, this is a person that entirely does it to himself and really doesn't have many pros outside that, and that person is David Sampson from Survivor Cagayan. And again, this is a situation where David Sampson pretty much marks himself as the first boot at the starting line of the season, where he is named the leader of the tribe, and having to make a decision on who to vote out of the tribe, he picks Garrett, the biggest and strongest guy of their tribe, in a position where they should have known that Garrett wasn't actually getting voted out, and instead would have been given the opportunity to get an advantage, as we had seen on many seasons in the past at that point. But this seemed to be a genuine vote out from David, talking about him thinking about the end game at the starting line. And he proceeds to talk about how he's wearing a blazer, not a suit, and all this just really makes him come off as this hyper strategic, smarmy guy, and he's really never able to recover from that. Where moving forward, obviously him burning Garrett right away in the game leads to Garrett finding an idol, forming the majority alliance, and turning the entire game on him to where he is the very clear first boot over someone like Jatia, who just sucked while out there, and in many seasons would have been the first boot. But David, again, just does it all to himself. And the one minor pro here is that he did have Cass on his side. He didn't leave an unanimous vote, but at the end of the day, again, the target that was on his back was put solely onto himself through a really asinine move early on, and because that, he is here number 40. Now, number 39, we have a pretty similar first boot, the ones that I think their mistake is not as bad, and that person is Sekou Bunch from Survivor Cook Islands. And I'm actually surprised that he is this low. I actually thought he was going to be higher on the list, but again, I feel like his game is kind of similar to David Sampson's here. Again, he is a person that had someone still on his side in Nate Gonzalez. However, also came off as a bit too domineering, with someone that was put out in front a bit too much, where him and Nate were calling the shots around camp, and even after the immunity challenge, him and Nate solely make the decision to send Penner to Exile Island in a position where they are 2 people on a tribe of 5, where the other 3 are women who now have a reason to gang up on them. So again, that was all pretty bad. I will say I don't think Sekou is necessarily the worst player in the world, though. I do think he demonstrated some strategic ability, considering his attempts to pull over Stephanie. And again, he is higher than some of the other people, just because also he was on a 5-person tribe. There really weren't many options for him here. But again, I think he put himself out in front too much, in a position where he is obviously going to be voted out over Nate, who is the strongest guy on the tribe. So, because that Sekou is here at number 39. Now, number 38 is a person that I always look at as one of the worst first boots of all time, and he is still in this bottom tier, but I had to put him at the top of this bottom tier because I do feel like there are some extenuating circumstances that led to his first boot, and that person is Ryan Aiken from Survivor the Amazon. Now, again, I know Rob Cesternino has talked about Ryan Aiken being a terrible player and being one of these people that, again, shouldn't have been a first boot yet despite his, and I do agree with that. Again, he is this young, athletic guy who, again, typically would not be the first boot. However, I do think this season was a bit different. Obviously, this was a season of men versus women. So in that position where you have a tribe of all guys, they're not going to feel as incentivized to keep around the young, fit guy when there are multiple of them on the tribe. Also, something that we do know about Ryan Aiken is that something that did greatly factor into him being on the outs was the fact that he did annoy some people in the pregame, where he supposedly annoyed Roger in particular at Ponderosa, to where just coming into the game, he was just instantly the first target from the likes of Roger. And again, would that happen in most seasons? I don't think so. So again, I feel like there are a couple excuses you can come up with Ryan Aiken over why he is the first boot here and why he did get kind of unlucky with certain aspects of his game. But at the end of the day, again, he is still a pretty bad player, one that had no reason to be the first boot, and also seemed to really just not get along with his tribe either. And I feel like those things leave him here at number 38. Now, number 37, we're moving on to a very notable first boots, and here we do have Chicken Morris from Survivor China. And Chicken is a weird case for me, where he is a player that is kind of the opposite of the likes of a John Raymond or a Sekou, where instead of coming into the season and being a bit too domineering, in that causing him to be out in front, Chicken is kind of the opposite, where instead he recognized the fact that he could come off as domineering and decide to slow play it too much to the point where it ends up annoying people in the opposite direction, where despite him being someone that could clearly help out around camp, he decides not to because he doesn't want to come off as domineering. But again, that is a just as bad issue to have, just on the complete opposite side of the spectrum as the likes of John Raymond and Jolanda. Now, I will say that, again, he is higher than them for me because I do think, one, he did show some awareness in his situation to where he was aware of this stigma that can be put on him, but then counters it in the complete wrong way. And for him to be voted out here over Ashley, who is someone that was sick, is again another pretty bad sign for him as a player. And because of that, for me, he does land here at number 37. Now, number 36, the epitome of this not being a ranking of these people as players, we do have the person that I have numerously called the worst player of all time. We do have Wendy Jo from Survivor Nicaragua. And Wendy Jo is kind of the worst of both worlds, where for me, the reason why she is low on the player ranking here is because she does do actively bad work across the season that does lead to her being the first boot. But also, the reason why she is at the bottom of the worst player of all time list is because she is also a player that has no chance to begin with. So when you mix in the fact that she had no chance with also the fact that she played actively poorly, it merges into becoming the definitive worst player of all time here. But when it comes to the first boot ranking, the aspect of her having no chance to begin with is actually what kind of propels her a bit. Again, it propels her above the likes of like a Michelle Chase and a Carolina and a John Raymond and a Ryan Aiken, mainly because, again, she had no chance. Wendy Jo is the type of person that is going to be the first boot on most seasons that she plays, and even if she isn't, she's not going to be taken seriously. And really, I do think her being paired up with Chicken here is actually kind of apt. I do think they have similar issues where, again, Chicken was aware of the stigma that would be put on him and tried to counter that. Wendy Jo did the same thing. She knew that she would be loud and annoying and decided to counter that by being extremely quiet and not talking to anybody, which again ends up being poor play on her end. But also, funnily, by the time we get to Tribal, she ends up going away from that to the point where she also ends up just annoying people like she thought she was going to begin with. So she really shows both extremely negative sides of her potential gameplay there, while also, again, just being such an inherent first boot to begin with. So again, there is very poor play here, but it is the fact that, again, she is just such an obvious first boot to begin with that I do feel like she did less wrong than the first boots that we've already talked about, and because that, Wendy Jo is here at number 36. Now, number 35, we're moving on to a similar case, but in a slightly different way. Again, a person that I think had no chance and will have no chance on most given seasons, but still did have some poor play through her being too domineering and really just not gelling with the tribe, and that person is Deb Eaton from Survivor, the Australian Outback. And again, Deb is a person that, again, I think in most seasons doesn't click with her tribe and is probably an early boot. And also one that, if she isn't an early boot, I still think will probably not be respected, or I don't think they would have any chance of winning the game. But also adding that in with the fact that, again, she did come off as a bit domineering and didn't get along with a lot of her tribe because of that. So again, that is really bad. But again, is the fact that I just didn't think she had much of a chance to begin with. That puts her above the likes of John Raymond and Jolanda, these people who should have been first boots in any scenario. While I feel like Deb is the type of person that makes similar mistakes, but also is always going to be a first boot, so those mistakes don't end up being as detrimental to her, considering the fact that, again, I think she's always going to be a first boot anyway. So because of that, Deb is here at 35. Now, number 34, we have a player that I was actually very conflicted on. I actually do not know where exactly to land this person, and is one of the more recent first boots, and that is Eric Abraham from Survivor 41. And Abraham is someone that I think when like assessing everything together, again, like he is similar to these figures we've already talked about. These people that are a bit domineering and through that don't gel with their tribe, and through that is like a consensus first boot for his tribe. However, I do feel like the things that like put him above someone like a Deb for me is the fact that, one, he was on a smaller tribe, so through that had less options. Also, I feel like Eric is the type of player that probably would have had a bit more potential moving forward in the game than Deb, to where while Eric just did not gel with his particular tribe, I don't think that's necessarily the way that the game plays out for him with other tribe configurations on the season, to where I think there is a bit of just unluckiness that happened with Abraham and what tribe he was put on. And then also, I just don't feel like he did that much wrong outside of just really not gelling with his group. And while like that and being just a social outcast is obviously an issue here, I didn't know how much to truly dock him for. So again, I'm a bit unsure of exactly where I should have put him here, but I did decide to land him here at number 34. Now, number 33, we're moving on to kind of a grouping of first boots here that were kind of social outcasts from the start, and were kind of voted out because of that. And at number 33, we do have Nina Acosta from Survivor One World. And I don't know, I did struggle with this one, mainly because like Nina is obviously someone that was technically the second boot because Courtney Moon got medevaced. And I do wonder, like, would Nina have been the first boot had Courtney still been in the game? Would Courtney have been a more obvious first boot? That is something I actually do not know. However, I do feel like Nina is someone that still was outside of the core majority alliance there. And I think out of the people that were not in the core majority alliance, I think she was the very clear person to vote out, being the less strong of the older women there, while also being a bit of an abrasive personality. I mean, we see her have a confrontation with Kat, and that isn't particularly great. But really, I mean, like, the only number she really had in the game was Monica Culpepper to a degree. I mean, like, I don't even know if they were really working together that much. I think it was more so just the fact that all the other women were working together and they don't even vote together by the end of it. And Nina just seemed seemed kind of aloof in what was going on. Mixing that in with her abrasive personality, again, I felt like I couldn't put her too high, despite the fact that she might have been potentially screwed by the fact that Courtney got medevaced, though I don't really feel like that was much of a factor. So because of that, for me, I have her here at number 33. Now number 32, we're moving on to one of the first boots we saw the most from, and here we're moving on to Reem Daly from Survivor Edge of Extinction. And for me, Reem and Nina Acosta are actually very similar, and I think there is an argument for Nina being higher, and the fact that, again, Courtney Moon got medevac, so who knows what would happen if that didn't happen. But I am going to put Reem higher just because I feel like Reem had more people wanting to work alongside her. I mean, she had a very good relationship with Wendy, and Keith is someone that she was very close to as well, to where, like, obviously Keith does vote her out, but I think that's more so out of self-preservation than a move that he actually wanted to do. And also beyond that, I just feel like there was not really much that Reem could do here, and I don't even think she does that much wrong here. Where, like, the show portrays it that, like, Tribe didn't like that she hung up everyone's clothes, and she was doing chores around the camp by herself, and gets a bit confrontational at Tribal, but, like, I don't feel like she does that much wrong, and I feel like the target was on her to begin with. I think she is kind of lumped into these players that didn't really have that much of a chance. But again, I put her this low because I do feel like there are a lot of connections between her and Nina in terms of their game position and the way that they played up until their boot. However, I feel like Reem had more allies and probably did less wrong. So again, for me, that puts Reem slightly above her here at number 32. Now, number 31, we have a player that I think is the epitome of a player that is just a social outcast and doesn't really do much right or wrong in the game, and that person is Rachel Ako. And Rachel is just a person that does not gel with her tribe. She just did not seem to get along with pretty much anybody there outside of CC, and she just seemed like an easy consensus first boot. Adding in the fact that she was not physical in the game at all, I just feel like Rachel's like really just sums up this group of players that we're going to be talking about now. These people that had no real chance coming into it, whether that be through them not being good socially with their tribe or through them just being looked at as a physical weakness. And for me, it does seem like Rachel's boot here was more so based around her just being a social outcast, which for me is worse than being voted out due to your physicality, as I feel like there was more that you could do in this situation than in the other. So because that, for me, Rachel ends up being kind of at the bottom of this sub tier here at number 31. Now, number 30, again, someone that's pretty similar to Rachel Ako, and they're really only above Rachel just because I feel like there were probably more outs for this person than Rachel. And at number 30, we do have Semhar from Survivor South Pacific. Again, similar thing. Social outcast on her tribe, didn't really have any alliances, was looked at as one of the weaker players, and through that gets voted out. I don't think Semhar does much right or wrong to lead up to her boot, though there are a couple things to mention here. I mean, obviously the fact that she did have a relationship with Ozzy, and considering Ozzy was kind of leading the tribe, it did leave a situation where, like, if Ozzy really wanted to fight it, maybe there was a chance that Semhar could have stayed. But I will also say that this connection with Ozzy also probably led to the rest being even more resolute in needing her out, where we see Jim Rice being a major orchestrator of this vote. And I feel like Jim Rice is the type of player that wanted to split up Ozzy from any other options, but also wanted to keep Cochran around as a number. And through that, I think comes Semhar's biggest flaw in the fact that she didn't have strategic relationships out there and just seemed to be an extremely passive player. But again, in comparison to Rachel, I do feel like she had more outs. I do think there were more possibilities to her staying, and through that, she ends up being higher here at number 30. Now, number 29, we're moving on to the pretty typical person that was voted out because they were perceived to be weak and doesn't really have much pros or cons beyond that. And at number 29, we do have the first boot of Survivor ever. We do have Sonia Christopher, obviously from Survivor Borneo, and again, she was looked at as the weakest on her tribe. She was one of the oldest people on the season. There really just isn't much to say. Again, don't know what she could have done. I think she was pretty much destined to be the first boot, especially after she injured her foot on the first challenge as well. Again, it was just such a clear physical weakness for the tribe that there's not much that she could do, but also wasn't much potential in the game moving forward. So because that kind of lands here above the people that did a lot more actively bad, but below the people who had a bit more potential in the game. And because that, she's here at number 29. At number 28, very similar first boot here, we do have Jim Lynch from Survivor Guatemala. And Jim is essentially the male version of Sonia. Again, a guy that was voted out because he was one of the oldest guys on the tribe and was also pretty sick after the ridiculously long trek that they made the players go on at the beginning of Survivor Guatemala, and through that ends up being a pretty consensus first boot. And again, it's just another version of Sonia. The reason I have him higher than Sonia is the fact that, again, there was this massive trek that led to him being extremely sick by the time he was voted out. Unlike Sonia, who really got injured through the immunity challenge, which wasn't anything too special. So, I mean, again, I think Jim's was a little bit more based around some unnatural circumstances. So again, he's slightly higher at 28. At 27, again, similar thing. We have Diane Ogden from Survivor Africa. Again, same thing. Older person on her tribe, voted out because she was looked at as weak. Also was sick, so that's also a factor here. Though I will say the reason that she is above the likes of Jim and Sonia is because I do feel like Diana at least tried to stay. I feel like both Sonia and Jim didn't really put up a fight and just kind of went out kind of more accepting of their first boot status. Well, I feel like Diana at least tried to put a target onto Clarence. She tried to throw him under the bus for eating food while the tribe was away. And again, like, at least she tries. Obviously, it wasn't effective. But again, that's more than I could say for the last two people on the list. And when they're in a very similar tier with very similar reasons for their boots, I feel like the fact that she tried is enough to put her above them at number 27. Now, number 26, the person that's kind of on the top of this grouping of players I feel like had no shot coming into their seasons. Here we do have Katrina Radke from Survivor HHH. And Katrina's, again, one of the older people on her tribe. Also is someone that's probably a lot less palatable socially than someone like a Chrissy, where, I mean, again, I've criticized Chrissy's social game. But I feel like Katrina is someone that comes off a bit more wacky, and through that comes off as someone that should be a first boot a bit more. But despite that, I don't feel like Katrina did that much wrong. Again, she was just on the tribe, looked at as the weakest person on that tribe, and proceeded to be voted out. And there were opportunities for her to stay. Again, we did see Alan Ball get very paranoid about the likes of JP and Ashley becoming a power duo, and through that do see Alan campaigning to Katrina to keep her. Though at the same time, it did seem like Chrissy actively didn't want Katrina to stay, which could be a knock against her there. But again, I feel like Katrina was a pretty baseline first boot here. Again, one that I don't know how much she could have really done to stay. I think she was kind of destined to be the first boot from the beginning, but at least had some inroads to where like maybe she could have stayed, but didn't do enough right or wrong to really place too high on the list. So she's here at number 26. Now, number 25, we're moving on to the most recent first boot at the time of this recording, and that is from Survivor 43. We do have Mariah. And Mariah is kind of a strange case. I do feel like Mariah kind of is lumped into these people that were voted out because they were considered physical weaknesses on their tribe. However, I feel like Mariah had a lot more going on than the last few people we talked about, and we did see her form an alliance with all the women to where she assumed that that group was together. We see her try to pull in Sammy to make that a 4. So again, she was actively playing the game. She was trying to make a majority alliance. The problem is that, again, she was looked at as a physical weakness, and they decided to vote her out because of that. Now, I do think, as a whole, I think Mariah does have some issues with her game. I do think the fact that she seemed to be pretty blindly loyal to this all-women group that didn't really seem to be a true thing, and didn't seem to expand beyond that, is kind of an issue. But realistically, again, like, I don't know how much she really could have done here. I don't think Owen was particularly likely to go home, and with the likes of Gabler having an idol as well, like, I just don't know what she really could have done. So, and she's towards the top of these group of players that were voted out because they were physical weaknesses on their tribe. Now, number 24, moving on to the top of this sub tier of people that were pretty consensus boots due to their physical weakness, we do have one from returning season, the first returnee on the list here, and this is from Survivor Heroes vs. Villains. We do have Sugar Kuiper. And I will say, just in general, returnee seasons are very different when it comes to a first boot list. As we will talk about much later in the list, a lot of the top first boots do come from returning players. Obviously, due to pregame and also biases due to their previous appearances. So that obviously plays a great factor on first boots from returning seasons. However, Sugar is a player that I just feel like is probably going to be the first boot anyway. Now, I will say that Sugar definitely did get harmed by the fact that there were pregame alliances. Again, on Heroes vs. Villains, the original Heroes tribe had the likes of Amanda, James, and Suri, all from Micronesia on the same tribe. They also had a connections to JT in the preseason, and Rupert fell along with them as well. You also had the pregame alliance of Tom, Stephanie, and Colby, and really just Sugar ends up being left out of all of this and ends up being kind of a consensus boot due to that, though I think at the same time, she's also just the physical weakest person on the Heroes tribe, in a tribe that was so focused on tribe strength on the offset, to where I just feel like Sugar was going to be the first boot anyway. While there are pregame elements that did factor into her being the first boot, I don't feel like they are the determining factor of her being the first boot. I feel like she would have been the first boot anyway, especially considering she doesn't really gel with the tribe even beyond that. And while there was talk about potentially blindsiding Amanda, obviously that doesn't end up going through. And really, I feel like Sugar, again, has to be at the top of this group of players that were like these unanimous boots that were booted because of being physical weaknesses, because again, there was more to her boot than just that with the pregame, definitely limiting the number of options to be booted. But at the end of the day, I do also feel like she was probably going to be the first boot anyway. So because of that, for me, she lands here at number 24. And now number 23. And from this point on, I think we're moving on to first boots that have like some serious merit to their game. I do think these are people that didn't just outright play poorly or didn't just outright have no chance on their seasons, but still, we are starting it off with a good chunk of players here that still obviously made pretty major mistakes that obviously lead to their eventual boot. And at number 23, we have a person that I think many people claim as one of the best first boots. And to be honest, I probably would have until a bit more recently. However, I do think when really looking at her game, I do still think it's massively flawed. At 23, we do have Marisa from Survivor Samoa. And Marisa is a player that, again, like, people talk about this all the time of like, she caught on to Russell Hantz and she was only targeted because she was so good that she figured out Russell Hantz. But it's like, she got voted out because she told Russell Hantz that she knew that he was playing all sides. Like, that is poor gameplay. Like, she is telling the person that she thinks is running the game that, hey, I know you're running the game, and that is really bad. But then we also have to mix in the fact that she also did seem to be a social outcast here. While she did have the likes of a Betsy on her side, and Mick was a person that she was supposedly close with, it's like, beyond that, most of the tribe did not seem to particularly like her. I mean, Ben Browning, again, it is Ben Browning, so take that for what you will, but had a lot of hatred for her. Supposedly it did get into a lot of fights. And again, while again, it is Ben Browning, I do feel like the fact that Marisa has the propensity to get into fights with Ben Browning consistently does show you some pretty negative aspects of her game, and the fact that she is still someone that is willing to have fights with her other tribe mates. And again, while the show like portrays it as like, oh, Russell turned the votes onto Marisa because of Marisa calling him out, I don't feel like that's actually the case. I feel like Marisa was going to be the first boot before that. I feel like it was more so her social issues with the rest of the tribe that were going to lead to her being the first boot. That, and also mixed in with obviously the fact that she's not as physically strong as the likes of a Ben Browning. But really, I feel like Marisa has a lot of holes in her game that, again, she gets propped up for this notion of her figuring out Russell Hantz. But again, within that itself leads to one of the greatest flaws of her game. And also beyond that, I think she was already the first boot anyway. So again, like, I do think Marisa is someone that gets a bit overhyped in the Survivor community, but again, does show some game acumen there, where she lands pretty much at the center of this list here at number 23. Now, number 22, I think another one that has some misconceptions about her, where I think people prop her up a bit too much, and that person is from Survivor Blood versus Water. We do have Marissa Peterson, and Marissa is a player that I think you hear this all the time of people saying that she got voted out because of Jervis, where Jervis bragging after the first immunity challenge, that's what caused Marissa to go home, when that's not actually the case. I mean, Marissa is a player that I think was always going to be the first boot here because of the mistake she made on day one. Again, literally on day one, when Brad Culpepper makes this comment of him not giving it his all because he doesn't want to harm Monica's game, Marissa immediately follows that up by saying that I don't want that guy on my tribe. And I think that is the true reason why Marissa is the first boot. It is because she calls out Brad Culpepper at the very beginning of the game. I think she was always going to be the first boot had they gone to tribal early on. And it is a similar situation to Marisa, where she calls out the person that is essentially running the tribe, and through that puts a massive target on their back. And really, this is worse than Marisa in the fact that this is actually what caused her downfall. Or again, I think Marisa's downfall was already happening. But I mean, that's also a factor of why she's above Marisa, to where Marisa, again, had other factors, had poor social play that caused her first boot, where I feel like this is actually the only factor for Marisa, to where I do think her targeting of Brad Culpepper put this target on her back that made her the easy target here, while also the Jervis stuff allowed them to rationalize it beyond that. So again, like when people say that she was voted out because of Jervis, I don't really agree with that, but I do think the mistake that she makes isn't as big as a lot of other people we've already talked about. So because that, she is here number 22. Now number 21, we're moving back to one of the more recent first boots, and here we're moving on to Survivor 42. We have Zach Wartenberger, who, again, obviously I'm not including Jackson in this, so it is Zach. And Zach really, I think, is more so in line with the likes of a Sugar and a Mariah and a Katrina, and these people that, again, was looked at as a physical weakness on their tribe and was voted out because of that. However, for me, Zach is above those groups of players because I feel like he had more people on his side. I mean, Zach is a person that had a relationship with Tori, and through that, initially, Tori wanted to keep him around. He also had a relationship with Romeo, to where Romeo was part of the power structure of that tribe and did want to keep him around as well, though obviously failed. So again, I feel like Zach had more outs here. Now, I do think he did some poor play through him really just openly admitting to him causing the immunity loss, which I think just further put a target on his back. But outside of that, again, like, I don't think he does that much wrong. I mean, he is aware enough to know that he is going to be the first boot. He plays his shot in the dark. I do think if he survived this round, I think he would have had some potential in the game moving forward. I just think he had a rough landing spot like those previous players, but again, had more potential outs than those players. So he places slightly above them here at number 21. Now number 20, now moving to the earliest first boot left on the board. We are moving all the way back to Survivor Marquesas. We do have Peter Harkey. And Peter Harkey is a similar first boot for me to someone like a Zach, though obviously wasn't voted out necessarily because he was a physical weakness, but more so because of a social outcast, to where people just found him weird and through that wanted to vote him out. Also, he did play a bit too aggressively, though, I mean, to be fair, if it was modern Survivor, this would be normal, but the fact that he wanted to talk strategy was looked at as such a social faux pas, to where they needed to vote him out. But I do think an interesting thing about Peter is that all the people he was close to end up running the tribe after his boot. Or again, he was close to Sean and Vesepia, to people who did want to keep him around during that first vote, though obviously they fail in doing so. The likes of Boston Rob and Sarah later flipped the game the following round in voting with Sean and Vesepia, but here do vote out Peter, but it is known that Peter had a good relationship with Boston Rob. And I feel like this is one of those instances where I think they were just worried of making a move that first round, where Peter technically had the numbers to keep himself around. Again, there were 4 other people that were not working with what was perceived to be the majority. It's just that he couldn't fully put it all together. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that he was looked at as a social outcast and someone that was playing too hard. But again, like, I feel like in comparison to a lot of the boots that we've talked about so far, the potential was there for Peter moving forward in the game. It's just that he couldn't put all the pieces together in that first round, and was just voted off for coming off as a big player and also just kind of a weird guy. And because that, for me, he lands here number 20. Now number 19, a player in a similar position, though kind of for different reasons. Moving back to another recent first boot, we have from Survivor 41, we have Sarah Wilson. And Sarah is a weird one for me to rank here. Again, kind of in line with the likes of Zach and someone that was voted out because they were looked at as a physical weakness. They wanted to keep the strong people around, but kind of like Peter, was someone that had numbers there. I mean, she had a 3-person alliance with Ricard and Shan, the 2 people who do end up running the tribe following this. And obviously, Sarah was closer to Ricard and not to Shan, to where Shan decides to let her go at this point. The fact that she had that alliance, and that alliance came very close to sticking together, I think is the reason why she is as high as she is. Again, there was a live tribal that almost flipped the votes onto Brad. And had that been successful, I do think Sarah would have been in a decent spot moving forward. But again, it was really getting over the hump of this first round, though also really taking context into it as like Ua ends up going on a losing streak. So more than likely she would have been picked off along the way anyway. But again, you can't really account for that in that first tribal, that they would go on that historic of a losing streak to where they only had 2 people coming into the merge. So again, I feel like Sarah Wilson still had a lot of potential in that first round, came pretty close to flipping the votes, which would have happened had Shan gave the go-ahead, and had some important allies along the way. So because of that, for me, she lands here at number 19. Now, number 18, we're moving on to one of the most notable first boots in the history of the show, and this being one of her 2 appearances on this list. We are talking about Francesca Hogi, with this spot being for her game in Redemption Island. And Francesca's Redemption Island game, to me, is one that's not that dissimilar from the likes of Marissa or Marisa, where she is another one of these players that's targeted right off the bat, seemingly due to her calling out of Boston Rob at the starting line, which again is very poor play. However, the reason she is above those other 2 figures and a few others is because I do feel like she at least had a plan to overthrow Boston Rob immediately afterwards, and at least started the process of trying to get that plan through. Mind you, this plan was still more than likely not going to go through, and even if it did, she was still in a position where she was still in the minority following that. But and she had the alliance with Christina Kell and with Philip Shepard. They had Christina's idol, and they could have tried to pull off a plurality blindside against Boston Rob. And the fact that we do actually see them try to put this plot together is more than you can really say for Marissa or Marisa, who, despite calling out the person that's running the game, they don't ever actually make a move against that person. For me, Francesca at least does, and did have Christina pretty solidly with her. Obviously, issues arise when the plan crumbles and Philip leaks everything, but I mean, it's Philip, so what do you expect? And even beyond that, it seemed like Francesca was the primary target there, more so because Christina had an idol, and there was worry of putting the votes directly on her initially. Plus also, really, it's Philip's vote that actually causes the vote to go her way. So it is kind of a lot of wonky circumstances here that leads to her eventual vote out, where again, Christina was probably the bigger target on the board, but had an idol. You have her really hostile relationship with Philip, which again is a knock, but also it's Philip. And again, she had a plan that again was very unlikely to happen, but at least was trying to execute this plan against Boston Rob. So again, it's enough for me to land her here at number 18. Now number 17, another first boot that has one real major fatal flaw, but outside of that, I think plays the round well enough, and that person is So Kim from Survivor Worlds Apart. And this is another figure that, again, I think makes a pretty big mistake in lumping herself in with Joaquin, to where the rest of the tribe flips against them, and with her being looked at as the weaker member between her and Joaquin, she's obviously the one to get booted there. But I don't think So Kim necessarily plays terribly. Again, she's on a small tribe with less numbers, and through that has less options. But again, the major flaw is really coming off as a sketchy player through lying about the neutral box, but also, again, lumping herself in with Joaquin. So through that, she pretty solidly fits within this tier of players that we're going through right now, of pretty active players, but players that through their active play put a target more or so on their back, and So Kim kind of fits in line with that, so she's here at 17. Now number 16, we are moving on to another pretty aggressive player in the game, and that ends up being Nicole Delma from Survivor Pearl Islands. And Nicole is probably the definitive person to me that just really did it to themselves. I think they are a player that was in a pretty good position for a lot of the game. For a lot of that first round, it seemed like they were aligned with the majority alliance against Lil and Ryan, but then out of the blue, Nicole decides to start targeting Tawana, to the point where that gets back to the majority alliance, to where they eventually flip the votes back onto her. Again, it's a situation where Nicole really just causes her own downfall, and has really no one backing her by the time that she goes home. She completely fails at the move that she tries to execute, and ends up being a consensus boot because of that. But again, when we're talking about all these first boots, I do feel like the fact that she at least was in the majority at the beginning of the round is enough to prop her up to be in this spot on the list. Though if this was a ranking of how much these players did it to themselves, I do feel like Nicole Delma would be pretty high on that list. Well, on a first boot ranking here, in comparison to a lot of these other boots that never had a chance, Nicole was at least well positioned at 1 point, and because of that, she's here at number 16. At number 15, someone that's kind of in line to the last few people we talked about, we're moving on to Ronnie Bardaw from Survivor IOI. And I feel like Ronnie is one of the toughest first boots to rank, largely because we saw so little of him. Ronnie has one of the smallest edits out of any first boot, and through that, I don't think we properly got to see his actual game game ability, where we do see him kind of being perceived to lead the charge against Elaine being looked at as a big social threat right off the bat, and is working alongside Aaron and tries to pull in a lot of the other women to flip the vote onto Vince. And it did seem like at one point he had the majority working alongside him, but eventually the vote flips on him, and we don't really get a proper explanation of why. Like, yes, we do see that the women come together and agree to keep each other safe, but that women's group falls apart almost immediately afterwards, and also it's never properly explained why Ronnie, of all the other people, I guess, he was most out in front. He seemed to be one of the ones leading the charge on talking about taking out Elaine. But again, I don't feel like he did that much wrong here. In many ways, it's kind of similar to the So Kim situation, where he kind of just puts a bigger target on his back through his more active play. But at the same time, it's it seemed to be effective for a little bit. So at least that's something. But at the end, they still goes out in a near unanimous vote. And considering how many question marks there are still around why exactly he was the first boot, he ends up landing here at number 15. Now number 14, we're moving on to one of the most notable first boots in the history of the show, and that is Zane Knight from Survivor Philippines. And Zane is a very tough first boot to talk about, because I do think in many ways there is an argument for Zane being the worst first boot in the history of the show. And he is another one of these people that did it to themselves. He told the tribe to vote him out, and they did, which on the show was portrayed as this being his strategy, that he was trying to test people's loyalties to him by telling them to vote him out to see if they actually would, and obviously ends up being wrong and they do vote him out. However, I do think there is more to the story here. I do think, for one, Zane is someone that had just quit smoking and had gone cold turkey, and through that I think was definitely feeling the ramifications of that by that point, to where I think in many ways Zane was okay with going home. And also, even beyond that, he was obviously the weakest on his tribe. He was looked at as a person that lost them the challenge. Do you know how much time he wasted on the run? And I think those two things are bigger factors on Zane Knight going home here than the actuality of him asking people to vote him out, where he is a very bombastic player. He is obviously in this Russell Hantz style of play of going to every person, telling them the same thing and trying to make these final twos. And we even see Malcolm and Denise compare notes at one point. So realistically, was he going to get caught? Yes, absolutely. However, I don't think that's actually what led to his eventual downfall. It was more so the fact that, again, he just quit smoking, and also that he just wasn't physically able to keep up here in a position where, again, they're on smaller tribes. It seemed like socially he was very well liked. The likes of Angie really wanted to keep him around. It seemed like he built a bond with Denise. He had this alliance with the guys, even though he wanted to target Russell Swan. He had a good chunk of the tribe wanting to work with him, if it wasn't for the fact that he was the most blatant physical weakness on a tribe that needed tribe strength. And I feel like those are more so the damning factors of Zane Knight's game than the actuality of his chaotic gameplay. So because of that, I am kind of willing to overlook a lot of the messiness of his game, considering I don't feel like that's actually what caused his downfall here. But again, at the end of the day, he is still a chaotic and messy player. A player that really overplayed his hand really early. And again, I do think it would have been effective in keeping him safe if he wasn't such a liability. But at the end of the day, he was. So because of that, for me, he's here at 14. Now, number 13, we're moving on to another one of the tougher people to rank here, and another person in a similar position as Zane Knight, to where they did do some bad things, but I think there are other aspects to call out of why they were the first boot. And at 13, we do have Tina Shear from Survivor Panama. And I actually thought Tina was going to be higher on the list, if I'm being honest. I thought Tina, in a way, is kind of screwed over. There's a couple things to factor in here, obviously. One, she's facing off against Suri, who we now know is one of the best players of all time. She's on a small tribe of only 4 women. And with that, there's less room to maneuver. You also have the fact that she had just lost her son and was still grieving while out there, and through that isolated herself from the rest of the tribe. So again, those are a lot of extenuating circumstances that lead to her boot being a bit abnormal, but at the same time, again, I do think she does some pretty poor play. At Tribal, she calls out the other women for not working around camp, again, making herself even more of a outcast there. She, again, does isolate herself again. It's understandable considering the circumstances, but it's still poor play. And again, it's one of these positions where like she's the strongest woman on the tribe. Like the fact that they vote off the strongest woman on a 4-person tribe is a pretty damning aspect of her game as well. But again, there are these extenuating circumstances that make it tough for me to land her too low, considering again just being on this small tribe to begin with, being against Suri, and also still grieving over her son. I do feel like there are enough other circumstances around her first boot that leave it a bit more understandable than the ones we've talked about so far. So because of that, for me, she's here at 13. And now number 12, and we're essentially at the top tier of the list for me. I feel like these top 12 are kind of way above the rest, where I think these are all players that were either screwed over or made like very minor mistakes that led to their boots. But with that, we're starting at number 12, a person that I know is looked at very highly, and I actually thought this person was going to be ranked very highly. But I think in comparison to everyone else I will be talking about after him, I don't think he did as much right or was as screwed over as the following people. And because at number 12, I do have Darnell Hamilton from Survivor Co. Wrong. And Darnell's one of my favorite first boots. I love Darrell as a TV presence for that one episode. And I do think he is a competent player. I think if he were to return, I think he would do very well. I do think the circumstances around his boot here were very strange. Again, he was on a small tribe of only 6 people. He was on a tribe with Scott and Jason, who really took control of the tribe really early on by pulling in Sydney and pulling in Jennifer Lanzetti, and through that really had a stranglehold over the strategy of that tribe. And they looked at Darnell as their biggest threat while out there. While the show tries to portray it as he got voted out because he lost the goggles during the immunity challenge, that's not the actuality of why he went home. The actuality is that he was extremely close to Sydney, obviously someone that Scott and Jason wanted to work with. And with them looking at Darnell as a big threat as well, they decided to target Darnell first to get rid of one of the bigger threats on the board, while also separating him from Sydney, putting Sydney in their back pocket, which is a very strategic move to make in the first tribal, something you don't really see that often as the boot for the first round. And I think because that, again, I think Darnell gets kind of unlucky to be in such a small group and be in a tribe that is so strategically active off the bat. But also, I don't feel like Darnell really does much right either. Again, I don't think he necessarily does that much wrong, but there's really no point in the game where I'm like, Darnell is making the optimal move here. I mean, he was never in the majority. Even Sydney, who he was close to, does end up voting him out. He's never really able to pull Alicia to his sides. Like, there really is nothing truly positive to say about Darnell, outside the fact that there's really nothing negative to say about Darnell. So while I do think he was playing a pretty crappy position and gets very unlucky in the way that the game played out here, I don't think there's anything that positive to attribute to his game either. So because of that, I do have to land him here at number 12. Now number 11, we're moving on to one of the last first boots here that weren't really screwed over in the game. And at number 11, from Survivor Vanuatu, we have Brooke Garrity. And Brooke is an interesting first boot in the sense that he is obviously this big alpha guy, and for that type of figure being the first boot, that is obviously pretty bad. Again, we talked about this with Ryan Aiken. However, I do feel like there's a major distinction between him and Ryan Aiken. One, Brooke had half the tribe on his side. It was a 5-4 vote. It was a situation where the 4 younger men came together right away and had an alliance. Mind you, they made it too blatant to the point where the other 5 come together and blindside them. But the fact that Brooke was the leader of almost half of the tribe, I do think is a positive. Now, again, he did put himself out in front, and that is a flaw here. Also, I feel like this is another situation where, again, he is a big, strong guy that typically shouldn't be the first boot, but he's also on a season that's split men versus women. So he's on a tribe with a lot of bigger guys to begin with. So because of that, they feel less incentivized to keep around the big, strong guy because they already have other ones. And I feel like that's another factor to look at with Brooke here. And really just in general, like, I don't feel like he does that much wrong. Like, I mean, I do feel like obviously he does put a target on his back by being the leader of the minority alliance and making that alliance too obvious. But again, I feel like on most seasons, he wouldn't be booted for that mistake. I think it's because he's on the tribe of all men that they decide to vote him out here, which I do think is a pretty unlucky aspect of his game here. And really outside that, he seems like a pretty competent player. I mean, we see nothing that he does actively wrong. So for me, like, Brooke and Darnell are very similar first boots. However, I think the fact that Brooke at least had 3 other solid allies is what lands him above him here at number 11. Now number 10, we're moving on to a player that I think is similar to Brooke Garrity in terms of the type of game that they played, but also had a pregame stigma around them that led to their boot. And at number 10, we do have the first of the Anderson twins. We do have Nadia Anderson from Survivor, San Juan del Sur. And Nadia is here having played a similar game to Brooke. Again, she is essentially the leader of what they were trying to do with the all-women's alliance. Nadia tried to get all the women together and add Josh as one of the girls, which leads to a bit of a social faux pas there that I do think was a bit of a knock against her. But also the fact that she tries to build an all-girls alliance on a tribe that only has 4 women on a tribe of 9 is also a bit of a knock too. But she essentially is this Brooke Garrity figure on her tribe. She is the leader of the minority alliance, and through that gets taken out. However, I think the thing that for me boosts her above Brooke Garrity is the fact that she was on The Amazing Race. And through that, one of the main campaigning points that Dale Wentworth used in putting the target onto Nadia is he would talk about how Natalie and Nadia played a manipulative game on The Amazing Race. Which, I mean, to be fair, despite The Amazing Race being a show that is mostly lack of strategy, I do think if you were to say any team, especially at this point in reality TV history, had played the game of The Amazing Race like Survivor, Natalie and Nadia are probably the answer. I mean, they gamed the U-turn in order to directly target teams to eliminate them. And I do think that stigma of Nadia being a cutthroat player definitely played into her boot here, something that, again, most other players don't have to deal with. Now, as a whole, again, I actually think she probably plays worse than Brooke. Again, I do think her creation of the all-women's alliance is similar to Brooke's creation of the young guys alliance, but I do think she does really ineffective work of, one, even keeping that group together, but then also flipping over Josh. But again, I think the pre-game stigma that was on her already does leave her higher than Brooke, so she's here at number 10. Now, number 9, guess what? We're moving on to the other Anderson twin. We're moving on to Natalie Anderson from Survivor 40, Winners at War. And again, this is a weird one because Natalie obviously ends up being the runner-up of the season despite being the first boot. However, again, we'll only be talking about her game up until her vote off. And straight up, I don't think Natalie plays that well in her first round. However, the main thing that is keeping her this high is the fact that she was a returning player, obviously, on this returning player season, and one that had Jeremy on her tribe. So through that, her and Jeremy become big targets, and considering Jeremy was more connected and was looked at as a bigger shield, they vote out Natalie here first. And in many ways, I mean, you can attribute Natalie's boot here to those pre-game stigmas, which is, again, why she is in the top 10 here. However, I do think within that, she does play pretty poorly. I do think she plays way too passively, and that is really the entirety of her Winners at War game, even beyond this. But she really plays scared. I mean, we see most of the tribe not really talking game to her and making her decide who to vote off there, which should have been a major red flag to Natalie that things aren't going her way. Also, just seemed like Natalie didn't really bond that much with her tribe. It felt like kind of laid back a bit too much to where even Parvati, of all people, who ends up being one of Natalie's biggest supporters postseason, was talking about how Natalie played really terribly across this first round, didn't really talk to many people. And really, again, if it wasn't for this larger target that was on her back because of the pregame, she would be lower on the list. But again, that was obviously a major factor here, to the point where, I don't know if she would have been a target here if it wasn't for her connection with Jeremy. So because of that, for me, she lands here at number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to another returning player, this one being a person we've already talked about. This is the second game of Francesca's on the list, and that is her game from Survivor, Cara Moen. And this is a situation where, I don't know if Francesca did that much wrong. I mean, in a similar way to Nadia and Brooke, I mean, she was the leader of what ends up becoming the Minority Alliance. However, unlike them, it was actually the Majority Alliance at one point. And it felt like she was in a good spot for first 2 days until on the final day, things really crumble around her. But even then, I feel like pregame negatively affected her there. One, that she's on the tribe with Philip Shepard, someone she had a very known rivalry with. And to be fair, was probably the only reason she was even cast to begin with. But then also, you have to factor in the fact that people were talking about her being a former first boot, and it would be funny if she was the first boot again. And I do feel like that also played a factor here as well. But really, outside that, again, I don't feel like she does that much wrong. I mean, she does get outplayed here. I mean, Philip is able to form a counter alliance to her and pull in people that Francesca thought she had as allies, people like an Andrea and a Cochran and a Dawn. So she does get outplayed, but again, I feel like there was other circumstances around her that made this still pretty unlucky to where, like, I don't think she does that much wrong here outside of just being a bit passive at points. So because of that, for me, she's here at number 8. Now number 7, we're moving on to a string of the final one-time players left on the list here. And this top 7 for me are all players that were pretty much screwed, whether that be through pre-game reputation / out-of-game situations, or with these next few people we'll be talking about, really just unlucky circumstances. And we're starting it off at number 7 here with Stephanie Gonzalez from Survivor Ghost Island. And Stephanie, for the most part, is just a pretty standard first boot. I mean, I think in many ways she would like fit in line with some of the people we talked about earlier, people like a So Kim and a Marissa Peterson, a Marisa. Like, I think she's kind of in that tier. However, I think a major thing that props her up here to where she's in this like screwed over tier is the fact that she was not the initial target. That initially the target was Jacob Derwin, and Jacob Derwin would have been the first boot had he been eligible. However, Jacob gets saved by going to Ghost Island, which in itself is a twist that has a lot of variance to it, considering they keep on changing the rules of it as the season goes on, where at points it gives people immunity, at points it doesn't. This time it did, and through that Jacob was safe, and because of that, Stephanie becomes the next target on the board. Again, really, like, Stephanie shouldn't have been the first boot here, and while beyond that, she was this player that was looked at as a bit dangerous and was taken out as the biggest threat not within the core majority alliance. That wouldn't have been a situation that would have even happened had Jacob not been able to go to Ghost Island, be safe for that round. So again, realistically, again, gameplay wise, she probably would be lower on the list, but because of the fact that none of that should have mattered, considering the fact that she gets screwed by Ghost Island, I decided to put her higher here, and she's here at number 7. Now number 6, we have the final first boot on the list here that wasn't formally a first boot, and that ends up being Jessica Pete from Survivor David vs. Goliath. And Jessica is screwed over in a similar way to how Gonzalez was, where Jessica also shouldn't have been the first person voted out of her tribe because Pat Cusick was the person that was looked at as the leader of her alliance, and more than likely would have been the first boot had that alliance lost out in the first vote. However, because of Pat's medevac, that takes out a massive shield for that group to where Jessica becomes the boot in the following round instead. And even within that, that's a vote that comes together at the very last second. Ends up being a 5-4 vote where Jessica still had half the tribe wanting to keep her around and were blindsided by her vote. So it's like, even without the aspect of her being screwed over, she would probably be decently high on this ranking, similar to a Brooke or a Nadia Anderson, but then mixing in the fact that she was screwed over to where she wouldn't even be considered a first boot here if it wasn't for the Pat medevac. Because of that, for me, I do feel like she was screwed over in her being a first boot here, and because that she is here at number 6. Now number 5, we have the highest placed one-time player on the list here. And this is a very strange first boot in the sense that this person was swap screwed despite being the first boot, and that person is Jessica DeBen from Survivor Fiji. And Survivor Fiji as a whole is just a very strange season. Obviously, it started off with everyone living together on one camp, and then on the day of the immunity challenge, the tribes were split into 2, with the tribal immediately after that, with very little time to set up the dynamics of their tribe. And through that, Jessica DeBen essentially gets swap screwed here. Where again, the story of Survivor Fiji is that it starts off with this explorers versus builders storyline, where almost right away there was a clear division within the cast of half the cast that would go out and exploring, and those people bonded together, while the other half stayed at camp and built the camp, and that group bonded together. The problem for Jessica DeBen is that she ends up being put onto the Ravu tribe, a tribe that had a majority of builders on that tribe, while she was a central figure within the Explorers Alliance. And through that makes her a very easy target to where she's outnumbered and also is looked at as a major figure within the opposite side. Also adding in the fact that, again, like very little time to maneuver there. They were literally only given a few hours after the immunity challenge before going to tribal, leading to her really just getting sniped out of the game. There really wasn't that much she could do, especially when like adding in the fact that she was also looked at as one of the less physical people on the tribe. I do feel like she is easily the most screwed over first boot out of the people that not on a returning player season, with so many things going wrong leading to her eventual boot here. So because of that, for me, she ends up being here at number 5. Now number 4, and as I said, the top 4 here are all returning players. Most people voted out here due to their pre-game reputations. And with that, we're starting it off at number 4 here. The lowest ranked of this group ends up being Sierra Easton from Survivor Game Changers, where coming into this season, again, Sierra was pretty much screwed. I mean, she already had the reputation as being a big player, being like the leader of this big moves movement, and through that had a massive target on her back while also being a physical liability and not really being big enough to be this meat shield. So really, she just had no chance coming into this season. She was pretty screwed. However, along with that, I don't feel like there's anything really positive to attribute to her game here either, unlike the next person we'll be talking about, to where I think they are kind of the same. It's just that, again, Sierra was a unanimous vote, very clear target from the beginning, had a massive reputation coming into the season. There really wasn't much she could do, and because of that, she's here at number 4. Now, number 3, again, another person, I don't think there's much this guy could do. Came into the season, big target on his back, being targeted by his own perceived alliance, and that person is Vetus from Survivor Second Chance. And this is another one where the show tries to portray it as he was targeted because he was being creepy with the women and everything, which, again, maybe was a factor, but that was definitely not why he was targeted. Like, we even saw in pregame that the likes of Spencer and Shireen were already targeting Vetus, despite the fact that Spencer and Vetus were friends before the season and had a pregame alliance. Same thing goes for Vetus and Jeff Varner, where Jeff Varner becomes the swing vote here and had an alliance with Vetus, yet flips on him. Though despite all that, Vetus still has 4 people voting alongside him, and for me that's the reason why he is above Sierra, in the fact that he did have some allies. He had Terry Dietz, obviously very loyal to him due to their very clear pregame alliance. He also had the likes of Kelly Wigglesworth and Wu vote with him, so he did have people backing him up here. But again, I think a large reason why he's targeted here is because of his reputation coming in this season. Mind you, I think Vetus always has this reputation, or at least should, on most seasons that he plays. But I think especially after having just watched Blood vs. Water, seen him be this very smarmy guy that gets a lot of credit for getting the women to turn against each other, which I don't even think is really warranted. I do think that is a reputation that was on his back there that really made it tough for him to really maneuver beyond that. And with the pregame alliance that Spencer and Shireen had, along with Jeff Varner and Ellie Wentworth, like, it really just led to Vetus being a very easy boot here. So again, while he didn't play optimally here and is really this like sketchy guy every time he plays, I do feel like this one appearance in particular was very tainted by his pregame reputation, and because of that, for me, he's here at number 3. And now number 2, and for me the top 2 was definitive. I knew who the top 2 were going to be from the beginning. I did debate the order because actually originally the number 2 person here was number 1. However, I did decide to drop them down. And at number 2, I do have Tina Wesson from Survivor All-Stars. And Tina's All-Star run here ends up being one of the most screwed over appearances of a player in the history of the show. I mean, she comes in, massive target on her back as a former winner. All the winners were being targeted coming into All-Stars, to where no one wanted to reward a previous winner and wanted them out as quickly as possible. And considering the tribe breakdown that she was given, where she ends up being on a tribe with only Ethan as the other winner, Ethan, one of the more physical people on the entire season, is obviously going to lead to a very easy Tina vote there, especially when she's also on the tribe with Jerry Manthe, who she never had a good relationship with either. Like, I really felt like Tina had no real chance here. I mean, really, it's like the best she could have possibly done was try to pull in Rupert over trying to get him to work with the heroes and Ethan and Tina, but like, I really don't think there was any real shot of that happening. Like, really, Tina comes into this with no real chance of making it through this first round once they go to tribal. However, the reason she's not number 1 here is because she was legitimately voted out, which I can't even really say about the number 1 pick, even though the number 1 pick has a lot of weird circumstances around him, which we will get to. But because of all those things, for me, Tina ends up being number 2 here. And at number 1, the number 1 first boot in the history of Survivor US for me ends up being Johnny Fairplay from Survivor Micronesia. And again, this is a weird one where really the debate of like, is he technically a first boot is even the question, where he is a quit. He quits the game. However, Jeff Probst doesn't let him quit the game, so he makes them vote him out anyway. And that does obviously really shake up this list, because like, really, it's like he shouldn't have been the first boot. He was not going to be the first boot. No one was voting him out. He was not going to be the first boot unless he quit, which he does unofficially quit and they do vote him out, which makes him still part of this list. Again, he is number 1 on this list. While he was voted out, again, it's because he told everyone to vote him out in a position where he wasn't going to be voted out before he did that. And the reason why he told people to vote him out is very justified. I mean, again, if you don't know the story, literally weeks before the season started, at a reality TV award show, Johnny Fairplay got his teeth knocked out by Danny Bonaducci on stage, to where he had literally just come out of a whole bunch of dental surgery and was still in need of painkillers that Survivor would not allow him to have on the island. And because that, while on the island, he obviously was in a lot of pain, so he wanted to leave, and that is what obviously perpetuated his quit. However, obviously the show portrays it as him missing his fiance who is pregnant, which obviously was a factor that he used on the island, but that is not the real reason of why he ended up quitting there. So again, in many ways, he should not have been the first boot, and actually it's very impressive that he was not the first boot. Again, Johnny Fairplay is the biggest villain in reality TV history, debatably of all time, but definitely up to that point. And the fact that he comes into the season with that reputation and is still not being talked about as a potential boot, and also is in the swing position where both sides want his vote, is ridiculous. Now, to be fair, a lot of that is pregame, where he did have pregame alliances with the likes of Penner and Yowman. I assume he would have had talks with the other side as well. But still, I mean, like, again, the fact that he had that reputation and was still not targeted in that first round is really insane. So in essence, he's essentially a player that was able to overcome this massive stigma that was against him in the pregame that every other first boot on this list was not able to overcome. However, he has to eventually throw that away due to needing to quit the game due to how much pain he's in. But if it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have been a first boot. And again, like for me, due to how strong he played his first round, the fact that despite the target on his back, he wouldn't have been the first boot and only had to quit due to some really bizarre out of game circumstances, for me, he has to be number 1 on the first boot ranking here. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every first boot in Survivor US, knocking another big Survivor US ranking off the board. Now, again, I said this at the beginning of the video, but like this is really like the last super obvious ranking to do, to where I guess next year the plan is to do a penultimate final juror ranking, but that sounds ridiculous, but I guess that's the next one to do. And maybe the year after that do second boots or something. I don't know the exact plan after that, but we'll see how this goes moving forward. But I always expect more Survivor, Big Brother, reality TV videos down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.